Before any explanation, consider only this. A German child, raised far from any musical environment, began to report memories that did not belong to his life. Memories that pointed directly to the daily life of an artist who lived and died across the Atlantic in the United States of America. And these statements emerged so specifically, so incompatible with his age and context, that they immediately sparked the interest of researchers specialized in studies of childhood memory. The boy's name is Lucas Brenner. He was born in 1997 in Kassel and grew up in an organized home with no significant artistic stimuli and little access to television. His family maintained a stable routine, focused on schedules, household chores, and occasional walks through the neighborhood. Nothing suggested that such an unusual topic would enter their lives. The first episode occurred on a typical morning. His father was adjusting the kitchen radio when Lucas, observing the gesture, calmly stated, "The studio sound was different. The walls were wood." His father laughed, thinking it was a joke, but the boy continued, "It wasn't here. It was far away, in the United States." The comment took his parents by surprise. Lucas had never shown interest in international geography, nor did he have contact with topics related to the United States of America. He was just a child, and yet he spoke with a conviction strange for his age. In the following days, new statements emerged. On certain mornings, upon hearing the noise of cars on the street, Lucas sighed with discomfort and said, "The traffic was much heavier where I lived before." On another occasion, he stated, "I wrote songs to ask for peace. People listened, many." His mother, unaccustomed to such phrases, asked what he meant. The boy answered naturally, "I lived in a tall apartment in the big city, the city that never sleeps." His mother froze. The nickname he used, "the city that never sleeps," is a well-known reference to New York, something Lucas had never heard within that home. Over time, the boy began to show an aversion to loud and sudden noises. Upon hearing a door slam, he instinctively recoiled and murmured, "I've been through this." This behavior caught the attention of the school, which described Lucas as disciplined, observant, and extremely sensitive to abrupt sounds. It was at this moment that the case reached the hands of a German researcher who rigorously followed the methods developed by Ian Stevenson. The interest was not in the musical content itself, but in the typical pattern that was emerging. Early, spontaneous reports, accompanied by coherent emotional reactions, and disconnected from any available stimulus in the child's life. From that moment on, every sentence from Lucas would be recorded with clinical precision. No detail would be ignored, no assumption would be made prematurely. The case would be treated as Stevenson recommended, with discipline, caution, and absolute neutrality. The formal investigation began at the same methodical pace that characterized the studies conducted by Ian Stevenson. The responsible researcher, Dr. Marcus Feldman, established as the first rule not to introduce any information that could direct or influence Lucas. Each session was only to record what emerged spontaneously, without questions that induced answers. During the first visit to the Brenner family home, Dr. Feldman spent hours examining the domestic routine. He asked the parents about media consumption habits, daily conversations, objects present in the home, and environments the boy frequented. He found nothing that could justify the vocabulary or the references Lucas had been presenting. The family rarely watched television, did not own international music records, and had no tradition related to the United States of America. The absence of stimuli was evident. The researcher then proceeded to interviews with the school. The principal and two teachers described Lucas as a focused, quiet, and cautious student regarding loud sounds. No classmate had mentioned the United States of America, popular music, or historical figures that could have influenced the boy. One teacher reported a curious episode. When attempting to introduce a rhythmic activity with clapping, Lucas commented, without emotion, "The rhythm needs to be firmer, or it won't work." The teacher interpreted it as a phrase learned somewhere, But now, in retrospect, it began to be seen as part of a pattern. Once possible external influences were eliminated, Dr. Feldman began the systematic collection of Lucas's statements. The first session took place in a neutral environment, with only building blocks and sheets of paper. The boy was playing silently until he spontaneously commented, "I worked in a small room, but with a large window. You could hear the whole city down there." The researcher only asked, "Big city?" Lucas replied, "An enormous city, lights everywhere, that's where I lived." The reference to the wide view was consistent with common descriptions of tall apartments in dense areas of the United States of America, especially in New York. But the researcher remained faithful to the method. He noted, classified, and proceeded without interpreting. Days later, in another session, a second significant account emerged. While assembling small wooden structures, Lucas said, "I didn't like it when they were waiting for me at the building door. Sometimes I just wanted to go inside." The researcher only made a note. The boy, however, completed, "There were always people there. Always." The phrase sounded like a memory of intense urban daily life, unusual for a child from Kassel, who lived on quiet streets with low traffic flow. The most important record of this phase occurred when Lucas heard, in the distance, the dry sound of something falling in the building corridor. He shrugged his shoulders, put his hands to his chest, and said, "It was a sound like that. Fast." And then everything changed. The researcher did not press the question. Stevenson always emphasized, when memory emerges accompanied by a physical reaction, one must observe, not pressure. Thus, in the first weeks of investigation, a set of elements was formed that demanded continuity. Fragmented memories, specific geographic references to the United States of America, spontaneous mentions of a building, aversion to intense sounds, and subtle yet consistent bodily reactions. The analysis needed to advance to the next stage, to verify if these fragments possessed any internal logic when compared to what is historically known about artists who lived and died in North American territory. For this, the methodology required absolute precision. The third stage of the investigation consisted of confronting each of Lucas's spontaneous statements with verifiable historical facts linked to the United States of America. Not to confirm an extraordinary hypothesis, but to measure the internal consistency of the reports as guided by Ian Stevenson's classic procedures. Dr. Marcus Feldman began a rigorous comparative analysis. He organized all the boys' statements into three categories: vague information, specific information accessible to the general public, and specific information that, in principle, was beyond the reach of a 6-year-old child raised in an environment without international stimuli. This chart, fixed in his office, would make it possible to observe patterns of coherence or contradictions over time. Lucas's broader accounts, such as the mention of lights everywhere or a city that never sleeps, could, in theory, be linked to generic representations of New York. Comments about people waiting at the building door or a studio with wood walls fell into a distinct category. They were specific, yet plausible to be learned casually. The point of interest arose in the third category. On an observation afternoon, while drawing straight lines on paper, Lucas commented, "I liked the small room because no one came in without warning. I wrote better there." Dr. Feldman noted the phrase and verified days later that many musicians who lived in New York used small private studios, often lined with wood, a practice popularized starting in the 1970s. Still, this was not enough. The researcher avoided any interpretive leap. Another relevant account occurred when Lucas, without stimulus, said, "I lived near the park, but the park was too big to see all of it from the window." The researcher noted the phrase word for word. Upon cross-referencing this data with urban records, he noticed that many elevated apartments in Manhattan, especially around Central Park, have wide but partial views of the park. Once again, it was not proof, but a pattern. The most intriguing episode of this phase came during a session where Lucas was manipulating wooden dolls. He positioned one of the figures in front of an improvised building door and stated, "He was waiting there. He shouldn't have been, but he was." As soon as he uttered the phrase, his shoulders retracted slightly, repeating the same physical response that had previously been recorded when he heard abrupt sounds. The researcher observed in silence, recording the emotional reaction with millimeter precision. Upon reviewing historical materials concerning the assassinations of public figures in the United States of America, Feldman realized that certain individuals were struck precisely at the entrance of their buildings, a fact widely documented in North American press archives. Even so, the researcher maintained methodological discipline. He did not show images, did not ask directed questions, and did not comment on anything to the child. At the end of this phase, the partial report indicated that Lucas's case presented an unusual internal coherence. His spontaneous statements, far from being modified or contradicted, remained stable over time. Stevenson considered this stability a critical element in the evaluation of anomalous memory reports. The investigation would advance, from that point, to an even more delicate field: the analysis of physiological and emotional reactions associated with the memory fragments, especially those linked to the United States of America and the mysterious figure the boy described as someone who shouldn't have been there. The fourth stage focused on the element that, for Ian Stevenson, had decisive clinical value: the physiological behavior associated with the reports. Words were not enough. Science demands observing how the body reacts to memories that the mind claims to carry. Stevenson documented over decades that children with spontaneous memories frequently presented involuntary physical responses to stimuli related to the remembered content. It was exactly at this point that the case of Lucas Brenner intensified. Dr. Marcus Feldman began conducting frequent, always brief, sessions in neutral environments. Each meeting was audio recorded and manually annotated, allowing for the identification of fluctuations in posture, breathing, muscle tension, and reaction to external noises. Nothing could be interpreted without precise recording. The first significant episode occurred during a quiet session. Lucas was playing with wooden blocks, building small structures, when he suddenly stopped and said, "There was a man standing at the entrance. He shouldn't have been there." As soon as he uttered the phrase, his shoulders hunched, his jaw tensed, and his gaze fixed on the floor. The bodily change was immediate and clearly involuntary. The researcher maintained absolute silence, aware that any intervention could distort the account. Days later, a second event occurred. A distant door in the building corridor slammed with unexpected force. The dry sound reverberated through the environment. Lucas, who was drawing, dropped the pencil, put his hands to his chest, and breathed briefly. He only murmured, "Like that." It was a sound like that. It did not seem like ordinary childhood fright. It seemed like recognition. The clenched hands, the rigidity of the torso, and the prolonged pause before resuming the activity were recorded in detail. No known trauma could explain the reaction. The family reported no violent episodes or real experiences involving impact sounds. The school confirmed that Lucas had never participated in situations that could result in auditory hypersensitivity. There was no objective basis for the boy to manifest this type of repeated physical response. During a subsequent session, the researcher used neutral materials, cards with simple images of household objects, school environments, common landscapes. Among them was a control card representing a generic sidewalk with a building entrance door. Upon seeing it, Lucas frowned and said, "It looks like the place. It's not the same, but it looks like it." The statement was accompanied by discrete rigidity in the shoulders. For Stevenson, this type of coherence between stimulus and physiological reaction was particularly relevant. The body seemed to respond before the verbal construction. The emotional memory emerged as a reflex, not as an elaborate narrative. The third point of this phase involved accounts about height. While observing through the researcher's office window, located on the third floor, Lucas commented, "It's low here. From where I lived, I saw everything very small down there." As he spoke, he leaned slightly backward, as if pushing something uncomfortable away. The bodily response again stood out. The sum of these episodes delineated a clear pattern. Abrupt auditory stimuli, images related to building entrances, and references to heights triggered involuntary physical reactions in the boy, always associated with memory fragments that pointed to a busy urban environment in the United States of America. With this data gathered, Dr. Feldman would advance to the fifth stage, verifying the longitudinal stability of the narratives and emotional reactions, comparing weeks of reports to identify if the content remained consistent, as advocated by Ian Stevenson. The next stage required Dr. Marcus Feldman to apply what Ian Stevenson considered the most decisive test in cases of spontaneous memory: longitudinal consistency. In other words, verifying if Lucas's statements remained stable over the weeks, or if they presented changes typical of childhood imagination. Genuine cases documented by Stevenson showed that the child usually maintained a fixed narrative core, even when new details emerged gradually. For this, the researcher reviewed dozens of pages of notes accumulated over 2 months. All sentences were organized by date, environment, and emotional context. The objective was clear: to identify patterns of repetition, contradictions, and new elements that might emerge without external stimulus. A significant detail was soon noticed. Lucas repeated certain phrases with an almost identical structure, even when he was involved in completely different activities. In one week, while stacking blocks, he said, "I stayed in the tall apartment. From there, I saw the lights." The following week, during a monitored walk in the residence courtyard, he stated, "I lived up high, far above the street. There were many lights." The context changed, but the memory remained. Another important point was the stability of his reference to the man at the entrance. In at least 5 distinct records, Lucas described the same situation with small verbal variations, but with absolute emotional coherence. In one session, he stated, "He was at the door and I didn't know." Days later, he said, "He waited there at the entrance. I didn't see him." At another moment, while manipulating wooden dolls, he commented, "He shouldn't have been there, but he was." The pattern did not fall apart. It only repeated itself with new nuances. Consistency also manifested in the accounts about creative work. Lucas repeatedly mentioned a small room for composing, always associated with wood and isolation. In a quiet session, he stated, "I wrote there because it was silent." In another, while drawing parallel lines on paper, he commented, "In the small room I could think. It was just mine." The coherence impressed the researcher, as there was no stimulus in the boy's environment that referred to music studios or creative processes related to composition. The same applied to the constant mentions of the United States of America. Lucas never backed away from this reference, nor did he adapt it in the face of neutral questions. When Feldman only asked, "And this big city? Where was it?" the boy immediately replied, "Over there, where everything happens, across the ocean." At another point, he said, "I lived in the enormous city. It was always awake." The precision of the terms did not increase, but it also did not fade away, a typical characteristic of children who are not inventing, but reporting fixed fragments. In the 5th week of this stage, a statement emerged that established a new temporal axis. Completely spontaneous, Lucas said, "I already had a grown son. He didn't live with me all the time, but I saw him." Feldman registered the comment carefully, as it was the first time the boy presented a social element of a family nature related to his supposed previous life. The patterns were there: narrative stability, coherent repetition, and absence of significant contradictions. Each element reinforced the framing of the case within the parameters observed by Ian Stevenson in investigations of anomalous memory. The final stage would require cross-referencing these statements with known historical facts in the United States of America, always maintaining the rigor of not jumping to conclusions. The analysis needed to be concluded with the same neutrality with which it began. With all the accounts organized and the physiological reactions duly recorded, Dr. Marcus Feldman advanced to the conclusive phase of the investigation, confronting the stability of Lucas's memories with documented events in the United States of America during the last decades of the 20th century. The goal was not to confirm reincarnation, but to evaluate whether the fragments presented by the boy possessed a historical correspondence consistent enough to justify their classification as a case of anomalous memory. The historical analysis was conducted with extreme care. The researcher gathered records from the North American press, biographical depositions, and public documents linked to the daily lives of artists who lived in cities like New York. For each item consulted, Feldman verified if there was any equivalent in what Lucas had been spontaneously reporting. The first point confirmed was the urban environment. The statements about height, large windows, and a partial view of a park corresponded coherently to the profile of apartments located around central areas of Manhattan. Although this was not conclusive, the degree of specificity in the child's statements remained surprising. The second point involved the boy's behavior toward dry and abrupt sounds. Feldman recorded that Lucas reacted to noises instinctively, almost always protecting his chest. This response appeared in 4 different sessions and was associated by the boy with a quick sound that preceded the phrase, "everything changed." Upon cross-referencing this data with historical events in the United States of America, the researcher found coherence with violent incidents that occurred precisely at the entrance of residential buildings of public figures. Even so, he maintained absolute caution. Emotional reactions, however intense, did not represent explanations on their own. The statement about a man waiting at the door was also analyzed. Over months, Lucas repeatedly described the presence of someone who shouldn't have been there. This description coincided, in structure, with public depositions about the assassination of certain North American artists, attacked at close range precisely at the entrance of their buildings. However, as always, the researcher refused to make conclusive statements. For him, the role of science was not to fill gaps with interpretations, but to record evidence. The third point analyzed was the reference to a grown son. Although Lucas never mentioned names, the pattern of the statement suggested an emotional bond and memory of a young figure already of school age, compatible with the children of artists who were prominent in the United States of America in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Again, there was coherence, but not proof. The fourth point was the most decisive: the constant mention of the small, wood-lined workspace used for writing and thinking silently. Architectures of this type were common in the private studios of New York artists of the time, including musicians seeking isolation from the intense urban movement. At the end of the investigation, Feldman compiled all the material into a report of over 150 pages. His technical opinion followed the neutrality that characterized Ian Stevenson's studies. He described the case as compatible in structure and consistency with patterns observed in spontaneous childhood memories. The content presents narrative stability, absence of known external influences, and physiological reactions associated with specific stimuli, always related to urban environments in the United States of America. The document made no claims about reincarnation. On the contrary, it reinforced Stevenson's fundamental principle. When a child reports memories that do not belong to their current life, and there is no clear explanation for their origin, the researcher's function is to record, compare, and preserve, allowing future analyses to broaden the understanding of phenomena still little understood. Thus, the case of Lucas Brenner remains to this day a meticulous clinical study, evoking profound questions about memory, identity, and the border between individual experience and collective history.